honest is the only way to fix it. There's no failure, no fall, there's no sin you don't already know. So let the truth be told. There's a sign on the door says, come as you are, but I doubt it. 'Cause if we live like that was true, every Sunday morning pew would be crowded. But didn't you say church should look more like a hospital? A safe place for the sick, the sinner, and the scarred and the prodigals like me. Well, truth be told, the truth is rarely told. Oh, am I the only one who says I'm fine? Yeah, I'm fine. Oh, I'm fine. Hey, I'm fine, but I'm not. I'm broken, and when it's out of control, I say it's under control, but it's not. And you know it. I don't know why it's so hard to admit it, when being honest is the only way to fix it. There's no failure, no fall, there's no sin you don't already know. So let the truth be told. Can I really stand here unashamed, knowing that your love for me won't change? Oh God, if that's really true, then let the truth be told. I say I'm fine, yeah, I'm fine, oh, I'm fine, hey, I'm fine, but I'm not. I'm broken, and when it's out of control, I say it's under control, but it's not. And you know it. I don't know why it's so hard to admit it, when being honest is the only way to fix it. There's no failure, no fall, there's no sin you don't already know. Yeah, I know. There's no failure, no fall, there's no sin you don't already know. So let the truth be told.
Well, happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all you who are fathers and grandfathers and uncles, and for those of you who have a special place in a child's life. Because our kids need you. Our kids really need men in their lives. So thank you for standing up. I have to tell you just a little story. There was a young man in one of my churches when I was children's pastor. And he didn't have a dad in his life. Didn't have an uncle in his life. Didn't have any men in his life. And he was starting to get into trouble. That middle school age and starting to run with the wrong crowd. And he started coming to our church. And the pastor brought him one day up front. And one by one, the men in our congregation stood and said, I will stand for this young man. I've kind of lost touch with him. I don't know what he's doing. But it sent chills all over my body when one man who knew the difficulty that he was struggling stood and said, I'll stand with him. And then one by one, the men in our congregation stood and said, I'm going to stand with this young man. We need that for our young men and our young women today. So happy Father's Day. You're important. Now, in saying that, we have a special envelope of spices for your steak that you're going to eat. So if you are a man, grab one, all right, as you leave. Well, I am Chaplain Deanna Stringer. Most of you know me. And I am the chaplain at Hospice of Charles County down the road here, and I attend this church. And I've been asked today to come bring you a message. Most of you know me as the quizzing lady. So, I've got a quiz for you today. What do these have in common? King Triton, King Fergus, and Scar. They are all, Lauren? They're kings where? In Disney movies. All right. All right, how about King Mohab VI, King Abdullah II, and King Philip VI? Chris, you know?
I need somebody to help me.
Yeah. If anybody would know.
They're in the line of Abraham, I know that.
They are current kings. Current kings. We still have a few of them. Yep. How about King Xerxes, King Darius the Mede, and King Nebuchadnezzar? Yes. And they are in the book of Daniel. Before I forget, kids, you guys can go head on back. I'm realizing that as you're answering my questions, you're still here. All right. In the last few weeks, we've been studying some of the kings in Daniel, some of the stories. And this is, I'll tell you, this is one of the most interesting books that you will read. So if you haven't had a chance just to sit down and start with Daniel 1, read through the first 6 chapters this week, it is really fascinating. The last 6 are a little more difficult, and I'm sure Pastor Jared will help us understand those. But sit and read the first 6 chapters if you have not already. Last week, in chapter 2, verse 37 to 38, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And in his dream, Daniel comes and tells him what that dream means. And he says, "You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory, and wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule over them. You are the head of gold." And if you remember this dream, he saw a statue with a head of gold and silver and bronze and then stone, and there was iron, I believe it was, in the feet. But all of those things were less than the gold. But like us, sometimes we have selective hearing. Nebuchadnezzar hears all of these wonderful things about himself. You are the head of gold. So he gets a little bit of a big head. And I'm taking a little biblical license here and guessing what he might have thought. Why only have a gold head? Why not have the whole statue of me be gold? And so that's what he does. He makes himself a statue of gold. It's about 99 feet high. And I got to thinking, well, how high really is 99 feet? And so I Googled it. It's about as high as the Lincoln Memorial. And he put it on a flat piece of land where it could be seen for about 13 miles in any direction. And he made a royal decree that whenever any man hears the sound of music, and it lists a number of different instruments there, they were to bow down and worship or be cast into the midst of fire that was blazing hot. Now, I want you to understand something about, a little bit about the culture back then. King Nebuchadnezzar worshiped the God of gods and the King of kings. And his understanding was that it was the god Marduk that was the god of God of Babylon. But Nebuchadnezzar is his favorite human. See, the humans were co-workers with God, the gods against chaos. And so this god Marduk and King Nebuchadnezzar were working together against chaos. And it is likely that when King Nebuchadnezzar had his coronation, he went into the temple of this god and took hold of his hands and bound himself to the god of the Babylonians, Marduk, symbolizing his submission to the gods. To bow to the king was the same as bowing to this god. And bowing to this god was the same as bowing to the king. They were one and the same. Sometimes we bind ourselves to our gods too in this world. For some of us, we bind ourselves to work. We become workaholics all the time. That's what we focus on. Sometimes we focus on success, on gaining more money, of getting that special thing that we want to get. Sometimes it's a relationship or a desire, and these become gods for us. We put more time into those things than we do into our relationship with God. And these are gods that are made with our hands. But I want you to remember a biblical principle here. God is jealous. God desires that all people know that He is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and that there is no other God above Him. He is not a God made with tools or fashioned with hands. He is the true and living God who created the heavens and the earth and all that is within them. We are to bind ourselves to Him and become the image of Him so that we can reveal to the world the one and only true sovereign God. The one, the eternal one, who gives us hope for eternity. We are to reveal to the world and all people God's glory so that they might see Him and come to know Him. We are to take away that veil that hides Him from the world and be a part of His revelation of Himself. 2 Corinthians 3 states it this way: verses 17 and 18. But whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Now, all of us were created in the image of God, not just Christians. Everybody in the world was created in the image of God. But it is only in being transformed into the image of Christ that we can truly reveal God in all of his glory. So let's go back to our story. So Nebuchadnezzar has made this huge gold statue. And then he is made aware that there are three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who do not serve the God that Nebuchadnezzar serves, nor do they bow down to this statue. In this culture, that was an act of treason. Treason, punishable by death. But Nebuchadnezzar is willing to give grace here. He is willing to give grace if they will immediately bow down to the statue. Because Nebuchadnezzar is afraid that if his leaders do not bow down, he will lose the protection of his God as an individual. And he will be the one that will suffer the consequences as king. He will lose his status as the favorite of Marduk. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego understand that God is the protector, that God is the truth. Which leads us to our second biblical principle. God desires our full allegiance, our whole heart. He doesn't require our work, even our church work, or our reputation, or our money, or our relationships. He desires faithfulness, no matter what the consequence. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stand before Nebuchadnezzar, and they state the truth in Daniel 3:16-18. It says, this is what they say to the king. O King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Why in the world would you say that to the king? You have a death wish or something? They said it because God is sovereign, not Nebuchadnezzar. I can kind of see the king's head just turning red from the bottom up and starting to get big like it's going to burst like a balloon. You don't tell your dad something like that, let alone the king. I would say they were truly gutsy. And not only because of that, because they didn't know what God was going to do. Was God going to protect them and take them out of the fire, not allow them even to get near it? Or would they lose their life and suffer? They didn't know at that point. And so they're bound with all of their clothes. And I got to thinking, why would they put that in the Bible? Of course they're going to be bound with their clothes on, right? Well, we have flame retardant pajamas. They didn't have anything like that. And so it would be very flammable. It would catch on fire instantly. So they're bound, and the king is so mad that he says, crank up that furnace 7 times hotter than it normally is to kill people. 7 in the Bible is a number of completion, which means they turned it up as high as they could get it, fully and completely hot. It was so hot that the guards who took the Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego to the furnace were incinerated immediately when they got near it. That's pretty hot. And with a push, right before they incinerated it, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell into the furnace. And if this were the TV series, that's where the season would end. But that's not where God leaves the story. These are the men who were faithful to God. They were God's servants, His representatives. And they had been tested by God. They'd been tested by Nebuchadnezzar and be found to be wise. They had done everything right. They had done everything right. And it is at this point where we often question God's motives. How can a good God allow these righteous people to suffer? Why does it happen to me? I have a hospice patient right now that looks at me when I ask him, how are you getting through this? And he says, I have been chosen to suffer. That's not the response you normally get. I have been chosen to suffer, which means I'm in God's will. He counts it a privilege to suffer for God because he has grandchildren and children watching him going through this. And in that, he gives testimony to his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, even in this situation. I'm glad that God can handle our questions. I'm glad that even that God sometimes allows those difficult times in our life. Because we're not the only ones that go through them. There are story after story after story in the Bible of people who have gone through hard times. And those stories are there so that we know that we are not alone. Can you imagine how Abraham felt when God asked him to kill his only son? What heartbreak there had to have been in that? When Moses says, God, I'm not good enough. Send somebody else. When Paul suffered shipwrecks and floggings, and he had to go through that. When Jesus suffered on the cross, we're in good company when we're hurting. And God answers those questions sometimes with biblical scripture. Isaiah 55, 8-9 says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." And then he goes to the New Testament in 2 Corinthians 12:9 and says, "But he said to me," and this is Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Okay. I'm not sure that knowing that brings us a whole lot of comfort. Because we're the ones that really want control. We want to know there's something we can do to make it better. We also want to understand the world should make sense to us. But we're not the ones that are sovereign. God is the sovereign one. And when I was a young mom, I started going to Bible study for the first time. I had a little baby, brand new. And we were studying one of Kay Arthur's books, and I don't remember which one it was now, but the word sovereign kept coming up. And I had no clue what that meant. This past weekend, we went to a Catholic church to see my niece get married. And Chris leaned over to my husband, Mike, and asked why every time a person went up front, in front of the altar, they stopped and they bowed. Mike explained that God is the king, and we respect and honor him. And that is why there is a bow before God's altar. God is the one in control. And he has the plan to recreate all of creation and all of the world back to what it was supposed to be. Perfect. Maybe someday we will understand. And maybe not. And that's okay. Because we have just one piece. We have one piece of the puzzle. And sometimes the pieces that we gather together actually fit together pretty well, and we think we've got it all together. Who can tell me what this is a picture of? We don't know. We don't know. God has the whole picture. Picture of a puppy. We wouldn't have known that by looking at the pieces that we see. We see only one perspective, but God sees all of the perspectives. What fiery furnaces are you dealing with today that seem impossible? Maybe you are going through something right now that you're not sure that you're going to survive or even get through. When something bad happens to us, we often think that God has turned his back on us or he's walked away, that he has forgotten us. Maybe he doesn't even care. But what kind of a loving father would do that to his children, we ask? Doesn't he love us? Look at the situation I'm in. And we cry out, "How long, O Lord?" As the psalmist cries out in Psalm 13, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death, and my enemy will say, I have overcome him. and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I will trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. Church, where's your hope, your faith, your trust in the fiery furnaces? Do you hear God speaking in your situation? The prophet Isaiah spoke to the Israelites about 150 years before they were taken into captivity. And he proclaimed to them God's response to the unbelievable situation that they were going to encounter in being taken away to Babylon. He says in Isaiah 41, 9-10, and verse 13, "You whom I took from the ends of the earth and called from its furthest corners, saying to you, you are my servant. I have chosen you and have not cast you off." In other words, just because something bad or disturbing is happening to us does not mean that God has walked away. He goes on. God says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious, righteous right hand. For I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. It is I who say to you, do not fear. I will help you." You recognize her? That's me when I was 3. I told you we went back at home. And my brother gave me a bunch of these old pictures. And my mom wrote at the top, "We had some fun Sunday night at the park." To me, that was not fun. That was true fear. Because that slide looked absolutely huge to me. I had never been on a slide before. And I climbed up. At that moment, I was brave, and I got myself into a situation because I couldn't come down. Now, my dad was at the bottom of that slide, but I didn't want to let go. What if he didn't catch me? What if I fell through his legs and fell before I got to the bottom? What if I had to trust him and let go of the what ifs to experience joy in that park that day? I had to trust and do what my dad was asking me to do, to let go. And when I let go, you would have thought that I had just ridden the highest and scariest roller coaster that the world has ever seen. Now, there's a new one coming out for you roller coaster buffs called the Jersey Devil. It's 13 stories high, travels 58 miles an hour, climbs a 130-foot hill before plunging 87 degrees vertically, and features a single track, which means there's nobody to hold on to. 180-degree stall, a raven dive, and a zero-gravity roll. Now, my situation at the top of that slide was nothing compared. But the fear was the same. The fear of dying or being incapacitated was very real to that 3-year-old. And I expect that the fear of not knowing, of dying, was very real to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego also. But they knew that their God was real, that he was living. And he was their God, and they were his people. I want you to hear how the story ends. Daniel 3:24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that were tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, Your Majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Unbelievable. Now, this is not the first time that God appears in the fire. You remember that Moses saw a burning bush in the desert that was not burned up. And he took off his shoes because he was on holy ground in the presence of God himself. God was present with him. And then the Israelites were led through the desert by a burning pillar at night, which guided their way and stood between them and the army that was coming after them at the Red Sea. And later, God says, "I'm not going anywhere, God, unless you yourself go with me." He was in that fire too. The pillar of fire reminds us of God's presence. And when God descended into the tabernacle, there was smoke that filled to the point where no one could enter. God was in that fire with his people. And God's presence demands a response. It demands worship. And the king says, he starts to praise. He says, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." But King Nebuchadnezzar falls a little short. He does not go as far as to declare Yahweh as his God, but defies anyone to speak against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God. And he says, "For no other God can save this way." He also stated that God sent an angel rather than it being God himself. God delivered his servants out of Nebuchadnezzar's hands, proving that he was truly God, Most High, rather than Nebuchadnezzar's God being Most High. I want you to see something important here. God did not take Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of the furnace, but he was willing to unbind them, to free them, to stand with them in the midst of this fiery situation. Our God is a God that is willing to get down and dirty with us in whatever situation we find ourselves in. The biblical truth is that God will receive glory and honor when he delivers us in trouble rather than delivering us from trouble. Maybe today you find yourself in a situation that you're fearful of. You can't believe that God has allowed you to be in that place or in that situation. Will you stand and be faithful to him even if he chooses a different outcome than the one you desire? Will you be faithful to him when no one else is on your side other than God? Will you stand with him in the fire and trust him and obey what he asks you to do? You do not need to fear. God will help you. His presence is in this tabernacle today. He is in this place. Come and worship with Him. Trust Him and obey Him, and He will stand with you in the fire, in the trials of life. I'm going to ask the team to come up. And we're going to sing Trust and Obey. I'm going to open the altar today. We haven't done that in a long time. But I think we can spread out. If you've got a situation today that you want to talk to God about, feel free. You can stay at your seat if you want. These front rows are open. You can kneel at the altar if you desire. But just spend some time with God and lay it out for Him. Be honest. Be honest with Him and say, God, I need you.
When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, what a glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Not a burden we bear, not a sorrow we share, but our toil He doth richly repay. Not a grief nor a loss, not a frown or a cross, but is blessed if we trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Then in fellowship sweet we will sit at His feet, or we'll walk by His side in the way. What He says we will do, where He sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey.
Now may the God of hosts, the God of God, the Lord of lords, the King of kings, go with you and be present with you today. Amen.
There is a grace the heart is on fire. Another way when the walls are closing in. set free. There is a cross that bears the burden, where another died for me. There is another in the fire. All my dead left for dead beneath the waters. I'm no longer a slave to my sin anymore. And should I fall in the space between what remains of me and this reckoning, either way I will bow to the things of this world. And I know I will never be alone. There is another in the fire, standing next to me. There was another in the waters, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding, power set me free. There is a grave that holds nobody, there and power lives in me. There is another in the fire, another in the fire. See a light in the darkness, as the darkness bows to him. I can hear the roar in the heavens, as the space between wells thin. I can feel the ground shake beneath us as the prison walls cave in. Nothing stands between us. Nothing stands between us. There is no name but the name that is Jesus. He who was and still is and will be through it all. So come with me in the space between all the things unseen and this reckoning. I know I will never be alone. There'll be another in the fire, standing next to me. There'll be another in the waters, holding back the sea. And should I ever need reminding, goodness be, I'll count the joy come every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. There is another in the fire. There is another in the fire. There is another in the fire. There is another in